Hey guys, happy Monday. Today is the official start to your spring break, which I feel like we've already been on for a month, but today is the official start. But I'm still going to be sending you guys videos every single day just for you guys to laugh at me or learn something, or mostly probably laugh at me. My last video from yesterday was the math riddle. I got a few people bringing in some answers. I'm going to reveal the answer tomorrow. So if you haven't done the math riddle yet and you would like to, you still have a chance. I'm not going to give you guys the answer yet. But I got a few people emailing in, and I got 3 people with correct answers. So that was Kaylin, Sergio, and Nicole. You guys all got it right. Great job. Keep emailing me if you think you have the answer, and I'll shout out everybody else who gets it right if I get any more submissions before tomorrow. So keep trying. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from a very old book called Sideways Stories from Wayside School. Okay, this is a book I read when I was a kid. I'm going to start by reading the back just so you know what it's about. It's 30 different stories, so I might do these a few different times. But this is about a crazy mixed up school. There had been a terrible mistake. Wayside School was supposed to be built with 30 classrooms, all next to each other in a row, but instead, they built the classrooms one on top of the other, 30 stories tall. The builder said he was very sorry. That may be why all kinds of funny things happen at Wayside School, especially on the 30th floor. You'll meet Mrs. Gorf, the meanest teacher of all, Terrible Todd, who always gets sent home early, and John, who can read only upside down, along with the other kids in the crazy mixed-up school that came out sideways. But you'll never guess the truth about Sammy, the new kid, or what's in store for Wayside School on Halloween. So, today I'm going to read one of the 30 stories in here called Mrs. Gorf. That's what she looks like. Okay? Now let's see how much this sounds like Mission Crest, huh? Chapter 1, Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf had a long tongue and pointed ears. She was the meanest teacher in Wayside School. She taught the class on the 30th story. "If you children are bad," she warned, "or if you answer a problem wrong, I'll wiggle my ears, stick out my tongue, and turn you into apples." Mrs. Gorf didn't like children, but she loved apples. Joe couldn't add. He couldn't even count. But he knew that if he answered a problem wrong, he would be turned into an apple. So he copied from John. He didn't like to cheat, but Mrs. Gorf had never taught him how to add. One day, Mrs. Gorf caught Joe copying John's paper. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Joe into an apple. Then she turned John into an apple for letting Joe cheat. "Hey, that isn't fair," said Todd. "John was only trying to help a friend." Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Todd into an apple. "Does anyone else have an opinion?" she asked. Nobody said a word. Mrs. Gorf laughed and placed the 3 apples on her desk. Stephen started to cry. He couldn't help it. He was scared. "I do not allow crying in the classroom," said Mrs. Gorf. She wiggled her ears, first her right, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Stephen into an apple. For the rest of the day, the children were absolutely quiet, and when they went home, they were too scared to even talk to their parents. But Joe, John, Todd, and Stephen couldn't go home. Mrs. Gorf had just left them on her desk. They were able to talk to each other, but they didn't have much to say. Their parents were very worried. They didn't know where their children were. Nobody seemed to know. The next day, Kathy was late for school. As soon as she walked in, Mrs. Gorf turned her into an apple. Paul sneezed during class. He was turned into an apple. Nancy said, "Bless you," when Paul sneezed. Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Nancy into an apple. Terrence fell out of his chair. He was turned into an apple. Marisha tried to run away. She was halfway to the door as Mrs. Gorf's right ear began to wiggle. When she reached the door, Mrs. Gorf's left ear wiggled. Marisha opened the door and had one foot outside when Mrs. Gorf stuck out her tongue. Mauricia became an apple. Mrs. Gorf picked up the apple from the floor and put it on the desk with her others. Then a funny thing happened. Mrs. Gorf turned around and fell over a piece of chalk. The 3 Erics laughed. They were all turned into apples. Mrs. Gorf had a dozen apples on her desk. Joe, John, Todd, Stephen, Kathy, Paul, Nancy, Terrence, Mauricia, and the 3 Erics. Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and Eric Ovens. Louis, the yard teacher, walked into the classroom. He had missed the children at recess. He had heard that Mrs. Gorf was a mean teacher, so he came up to investigate. He saw the 12 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. I must be wrong, he thought. She must be a good teacher if so many children bring her apples. He walked back down to the playground. The next day, a dozen more children were turned into apples. Louis, the yard teacher, came back into the room. He saw 24 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. There were only 3 children left in the class. She must be the best teacher in the world, he thought. By the end of the week, all of the children were apples. Mrs. Gorf was very happy. Now I can go home, she said. I don't have to teach any more. I won't have to walk up 30 flights of stairs ever again. You're not going anywhere, shouted Todd. He jumped off the desk and bopped Mrs. Gorf on the nose. The rest of the apples followed. Mrs. Gorf fell on the floor. The apples jumped all over her. Stop, she shouted, or I'll turn you into applesauce. But the apples didn't stop, and Mrs. Gorf could do nothing about it. Turn us back into children, Todd demanded. Mrs. Gorf had no choice. She stuck out her tongue, wiggled her ears, this time her left one first, then her right, and turned the apples back into children. All right, said Mauricia. Let's go get Louis. He'll know what to do. No, screamed Mrs. Gorf. I'll turn you back into apples. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, and stuck out her tongue. But Jenny held up a mirror, and Mrs. Gorf turned herself into an apple. The children didn't know what to do. They didn't have a teacher. Even though Mrs. Gorf was mean, they didn't think it was right to leave her as an apple. But none of them knew how to wiggle their ears. Louis, the yard teacher, walked in. Where's Mrs. Gorf? He asked. Nobody said a word. Boy, am I hungry, said Louis. I don't think Mrs. Gorf would mind if I ate this apple. After all, she always has so many. He picked up the apple, which was really Mrs. Gorf, shined it on his shirt, and ate it. And that's chapter 1 of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. That is Mrs. Gorf right there. Hope you guys are having an excellent Monday. I will talk with you guys soon. Like I said, I'm going to give the answer to that math riddle tomorrow. And if you get it right, you'll get a shout out on here. So have a great rest of your Monday. Miss you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.